try this again. Hopefully we'll resolve the problem. Sorry about that, our connection cut out there for a second. Hopefully we'll be able to work it again. Keep this thing from going to sleep. So somebody was asking about the creek and how the definition of creek versus river, all that. I don't really think there is a clear definition. In the Mendocino coast, there are little tiny creeks that and then farther up north here in Humboldt County, there's big raging, what I would call rivers, that the names would go by creeks. So let's see if I can keep this somewhat straight. It's one of those days, everybody, where I'm just having some tech issues. It happens. So thank you for your patience. Woo! Wow, that gimbal is stressing out. Let me try to fix it this way. Thank you for your patience, everybody. I'm gonna see if I can make this thing a little less wonky. I mean, it looks great when it works. It's so smooth. But when it doesn't, it's kind of useless. Okay, let me restart. So again, my name is Ryan. I work with California State Parks, and I'm really grateful to be here today to bring the parks into your home. I know a lot of you are at home, and it is not always fun. It's maybe getting kind of boring. Maybe it's kind of frustrating. And I know that it's for me, myself, it's once in a while for work I get to go out here, but pretty often I don't. So I'm really grateful that I get to, but I also recognize that that's a privilege that a lot of people don't have. And so I recognize that, and I just want you to know that when the act of staying home is a lot of work for all of us, and it's a lot of stress for all of us, but it is also an act of compassion, and it's an act of care for people who are more vulnerable. It's also an act of care for communities. Like here in Humboldt County, we have a lot of really small towns that can't take they don't have the infrastructure to take on a lot more patients. And so everyone kind of like hanging out in their hometown, hanging out where they're at, is actually taking care of our medical infrastructure and making sure that our nurses and our doctors and everyone aren't super hammered with patients. And so just pat yourself on the back and recognize that even doing nothing is actually a really compassionate act right now. And with that said, I also hope that a lot of you get to come out here again in the near future. And if you do, then maybe you will get to enjoy this beautiful creek, Bull Creek. I see a comment here. Love that creek. It was where I had so it was where you had your first redwood hike. Wow, so Bull Creek, Bull Creek has this beautiful trail along it that is part of the Rockefeller Forest, which is in the kind of the eastern end, and then that's part of Bull Creek Flats, which is this 9-mile loop that takes you through the longest contiguous old-growth redwood forest that exists. It's the largest redwood forest that exists, 10,000 acres. And through the heart of that redwood forest, which is also the tallest redwood forest, is Bull Creek. Now, you mentioned cyanobacteria. I saw that there. Yeah, so that happens in the summertime. Because we have a wet season and a dry season, that means we have close to 6 months with no rain. The water starts to warm up in the middle of the summer, especially in drought years where we have much rain throughout the spring. And then the water level gets lower, the water temperature rises up. There's usually an outbreak of blue-green algae and cyanobacteria, things like that. So those are definitely issues. And when in the late summer, it's not as great to swim in here, especially if you have pets. This creek here, not so bad, but the Eel River, where this creek flows into, can get pretty gnarly in certain years. Are there any fish in there? Well, that's a great question, and I guess we could maybe try to investigate, see if we can spot anything. I don't know for sure if especially because it's kind of cloudy right now. Looking down at this creek, I'm seeing a lot of other kinds of creatures. We look down here, you might notice what looks like just kind of little of sticks. That right there, that's actually a caddisfly larva that's made a little shell of sticks and other kinds of debris. which is good food for salmon, for little fish. Walking around here, I see some clusters of eggs. In fact, I don't know my amphibians very well, so I'm not sure. But I'll look that up afterwards. If anyone has an idea of what kinds of eggs those are that are clustered right there, I'm sorry if you're having trouble viewing it. As far as spotting little juvenile fish, I don't see any. And by the way, this is the time of year when you would start to see juvenile salmon, little fry that are only about the size of your pinky. They were hatched in the winter and probably more hatched in the late winter and maybe early spring, and they are just now beginning and will in the next few months begin their migration downstream. But eventually they will make their way back home in possibly 2 years or even 4 years, depending on the species, maybe even 5 or 6 years. And it looks like a lot of people are really appreciating the comments. Are there any fish in there? So we talked about that. There probably are. We're just not seeing them. There's Chinook salmon and coho salmon, steelhead trout. There are sculpins, so some small fish as well. So we have Margaret saying that she really loves this river in there, this creek in the winter time, which I do as well, because that's really when you see a lot of the action, a lot of the brown kind of muddy water pumping down here. And there's been times where this river, this creek, really did look like a river. When, for example, in 1955, there was this huge flood event, the 55 flood, which actually did a lot of damage, tore down a lot of trees. There were hundreds of trees that were toppled. A lot of it had to do with the fact that the upper watershed of Bull Creek was being really heavily logged. So that wasn't in the state park boundary. And so the upper watershed was being cut down. That watershed, as I mentioned in my last Facebook Live, is sort of like a bathtub, basically. Think of a bathtub of land where the creek is in the being the mountains. So the upper part of this bowl or bathtub that is the Bull Creek watershed was being cut down really heavily. It meant there was a lot of loose soil, and when this historic rain event happened, it caused this huge landslide and this huge flood that just ripped trees out, which is why there's all this riprap right here. One of the big reasons that there was a lot of human effort to reinforce some of these stream banks to prevent some of these massive trees from falling, including one of the trees here called the giant tree, which I believe is that one right there. Some of these trees are almost 370 feet tall, so a 35-story building. And people wanted to protect them. They wanted to make sure that they were not by another flood event. And what do you know? In 1964, the New Year's flood struck, and that was an even more powerful flood where the Eel River, which is the river that this leads to, was pumping out more water than the Mississippi. In fact, almost twice the amount of water. And this river is not the biggest river in California, and yet it was pumping out that much water because of just the historic rain. So the trees themselves are pretty hardy and can withstand a lot of flooding, but when you add on top of that clear cutting forest that makes the flooding even worse, because suddenly there's not that water being absorbed into the roots or the trees kind of absorbing that runoff, it can be pretty devastating. Oh, hey Steve, watching from the Little Hendy Grove, which is my old stomping grounds. Just a little inside baseball for all you. Steve, who's just joined us there, or just left a comment, lives in the house that I used to live in down there at Hendy Woods State Park. My first state park job, Hendy Woods State Park. Beautiful little redwood grove in Mendocino County. Highly recommend you check it out when we are able to go to places like that. Awesome, we got someone from Texas joining us. So, hey, let me just get to kind of the question that I asked in that previous Facebook Live that kind of went south because of connection. The question I asked everyone was, what feels like home to you? So I asked this question, what feels like home to you? because it doesn't necessarily have to be your house where you've probably spent too much time recently anyway, and you're kind of like, well, my heart is in a different place. And I will say for myself that redwood trees, the redwood forests themselves, feel like home to me, because this isn't particularly the place where I grew up. I grew up pretty close by in the North Bay, but my family would come up to these redwood forests all the time, and my grandparents lived just north of here, so we were always in the redwoods visiting my grandparents. And so this place really does feel like home to me. But for you, it might be something else. And I'd love to know where your heart lives, and especially this time when you're really thinking about those places that you just want to be right now. And the reason I also thought of that question is because for our salmon that use Bull Creek and use this watershed, this area is a perfect example of a home, because this is where the salmon's journey begins, and it's where the salmon's journey ends. There are, every year, a run of salmon that come up, and run of steelhead as well, that come up this creek, and they are making this journey come to an end. They've been traveling for possibly up to 4 years, and they are concluding their journey. So these salmon are an animal that is kind of identified with this forest, and in fact these animals are so dependent on this place, and so that actually they, if one of these salmon were picked up and were put into a different river, they would probably try to find their way to get back here in Bull Creek. It's been ingrained in their minds. In fact, salmon have evolved to basically have a mental map in their head of they are on the planet and how they need to get back. So they have in their brain, they can sense the magnetic field of the planet. So they know the Earth's magnetic field, and so they kind of like have a marker where they're able to kind of navigate from and back when they go all the way out to the ocean as adults and come all the way back. So let's see, I'm just going to see, now that I've rambled on for a little bit, what some people think of as their home. So for Jim, it's the Smoky Mountains. You know, I've never made it to the Smoky Mountains, but I would love to, and some of my ancestors are from that area, so I really think that I should probably make it out that way. So awesome. The Great Smoky Mountains, probably for a lot of people, it is places where there are also really beautiful parks. Let's see, what else do we have here? What feels like home to you? Washington State. So we have Aaron talking about Washington State, where I visit often. Specifically, University Place, which is walking distance from Puget Sound. All right, so the Salish Sea area, Puget Sound area. Yeah, for a lot of people, places that are places in nature or places near beautiful landmarks. For Darlene, it's the coast. Born and raised near the beach, but love the redwoods. So, you know, the cool thing about redwoods is that you can always have both, because the coast redwoods, by the virtue of their name, they grow right near the coast. There are 3 different members of the redwood family. There's the coast redwoods, which we are surrounded by here, that only live in California's northern and central coast, only about 30 miles from the ocean, and no farther inland than that unless they were planted. And then there's the giant sequoias, Sequoia dendron giganteum, which live in the Sierra Nevada mountains. They're different species. They're not the same tree. They don't occupy the same environment. Then the other one is the dawn redwood that actually grows in China. And the dawn redwood loses its leaves in the winter. It's the only one of the family that loses all of its leaves in the wintertime. So let's see. Big Sur. So Big Sur is home for Darlene. Okay. Oh, I see. You live near near the redwoods and the coast. Big Sur. That's awesome. That's a place I'd love to visit more, and it's on my list for when I'm able to travel. The high desert, Humboldt County, the Sutter Buttes, and all the places that feel like home. Awesome. So Debbie mentioned the high desert and Sutter's Buttes, which, if you haven't heard of Sutter Buttes, they're out in the Central Valley of California. California has this Central Valley that is 300 miles, or well, rather, I believe 300 or 500. I think it might be 300 miles long and about 70 to 90 miles wide. And within that valley, there's this tiny little mountain range called the Sutter Buttes that is actually the smallest mountain range on the planet. It's its own geologic mountain range. It's this tiny little, maybe 10,000 acre range of mountains right smack dab in the middle of the Central Valley. This rocky little mountain chain that juts up among almond orchards and other kinds of orchards. Hi from Michigan. So Stephanie's there in Michigan, and probably feels at home in that area as well. Let's see, any other places that feel like home to people? For me, I mentioned that the Redwood coast where I grew up is definitely a place that feels like home. But you know, our home is in many places, because maybe you had really important transformative or formative experiences in different places. And so I definitely think about other places in California where I've spent a lot of my time. The Bay Area is a really important place for me. Sonoma County and Napa counties where I spent a lot of time. So Michigan isn't home for you, Stephanie. It sounds like it's too cold there. So maybe it's another place. So we've got a lot of participation. I'm really happy. Hi, Lily. Good to hear from you. Awesome. Another state park friend there. So let's just take a look, since we've got so many people joining us. Bull Creek, a place called Bull Creek Flats, and the creek itself is at the heart of this area. But Bull Creek itself, as I mentioned to others, the thing that is so important about this place is that it houses the tallest forest on the planet. So there is no forest on Earth that has more trees over 300 feet tall than this forest as well. It's 10,000 acres of forest. So it's if you were to lay it out in like the city of San Francisco, it'd probably be maybe a third or a quarter of the land area that San Francisco covers. And the reason I compare it to that city is because San Francisco has a good skyline, and so does this forest as well. We're surrounded by some big trees, including one tree, which and there's also the tall tree. These trees get close to 370 feet tall. In fact, the giant tree I think might be taller than 370 feet tall. And you know, trees have names. Sometimes people give trees names, but more recently, state park people and scientists have tried to avoid naming trees, because what that does is when you give a tree a name is you kind of amazing and unique the other trees that are around it. Just because the tree doesn't have a name doesn't mean it's not special, and just because the tree has a name doesn't mean it's the coolest tree ever. It just happens to be maybe the most accessible. So I believe that it's better to not name a tree, because a tree is so unique, and that I don't want to draw attention away from some of the other really significant trees that live here. And the trees do have a scientific name, Sequoia sempervirens. So trees are strangely good cell connections. That seems to be what Steve thinks. So yeah, if you are able to do your live streams and events out in your redwoods, it's always impressive. Let's see, Stephanie loves the redwoods. They're one of your favorite places. You were fortunate to spend a week there last August. Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you got to go there soon. Some people, it's been on their bucket list for years, maybe decades. And so some of you, maybe after all this blows over and you're able to come back, you're going to race to these places, because you don't always appreciate things until you're not able to get to them, and then you realize just how important that is. It's always a good reason to try to seize the moment if you're able to. So we started off talking about what feels like home to you, and a lot of you mentioned some really impressive things about some places that are important to you, and I shared with you a little bit about what's home to me. And of course, Bull Creek itself, home to many different creatures, including the salmon, who journey hundreds or thousands of miles to make their way back to this forest. And there is this connection between you and your place. You know, that is your home a better place. You are a member of your community. You support your economy by being there. There are people there in your home that care for you and know who you are, even if you don't know who they are at times. And that is the same for these redwood forests as well. There are creatures that, like the salmon, that make their way back into these forests and play a really important role. The salmon themselves give their nutrients after they spawn and die. They give their nutrients to this forest. These trees grow healthier because of animals like salmon that return and recharge these places with healthy nutrients and basically forest fertilizer. Feed bear and bald eagles and lots of other critters that depend on the entire redwood forest ecosystem, but especially the salmon. So with that, let's see if we've got any other comments here. Looks like we've got a little back and forth between Lily and Steve there. We've got Lynn, camped here as a kid, beautiful area. Yeah, maybe you know some other beautiful areas around you. I also want to take this to remind people that, you know, find a lot of beauty in some pretty rare or pretty that you would at first. And that's something I've noticed even in my neighborhood as I've been spending a lot more time there, is just some of the plants that grow around my house or around my street. Some of the bird sounds. I've been really curious about learning more of the birds that are in my general area, learning about some of the landmarks. So I hope you take this time, well, you're not able to visit the parks, to maybe get to know your own home a little better. Get to know the places around you. And in fact, one of the things that we're doing, this is a plug for that, is the state parks has this challenge, Parks in Your Home Challenge. And what it is basically you make a video of yourself imagining that your home is a park and imagining that that we are the visitors, and you tell us something about something in your home that is worth protecting. And it doesn't have to be a plant or animal. It could also be your record collection. It could be maybe a family heirloom that's really important. But if you go then you would make that video and use the hashtag Parks in Your Home Challenge, then we will possibly link that if we think that video is particularly representative and good. And so the Parks in Your Home Challenge is another way where you can maybe get to appreciate your home a little better. So everyone, I want to thank you so much for joining me for this discussion about what feels like home to you. Great input. I hope that you are staying safe, and I hope that you continue to learn more about your own home and be thinking about those places that are home to you, and hopefully planning your next trip when you're able to. And I really look forward to seeing you all. Let me just close on a few panoramas of Bull Creek Flats, our old growth redwoods here, and give you a chance to enjoy some of my home. Thank you so much for joining me, everybody. Hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you on the trail sometime.